A version of this video is already on YouTube, but I'm re-recording a new version because it was my first video and it really wasn't that good. Commodity dependence in emerging economies. So this video is about commodity dependency in emerging economies. So many terms are used to refer to this phenomenon. Commodity dependency, the resource curse Dutch disease. So this happens because countries that have an advantage in commodity production can simply produce commodities and then trade them for consumer goods, because other countries that produce consumer goods are willing to buy the commodities. And again, because they're better at commodity production, they can get more consumer goods by trading their commodities than by producing them themselves. And that's going to be a bad thing to their economies. So countries with a comparative advantage in commodities will specialize in commodity production. Economic activity will concentrate there instead of manufacturing, and that would be harmful for the long-term health of their economies. So according to basic trade theory, countries will specialize in what they're best at. So their economic activity will concentrate in their comparative advantage and move away from all other areas. If there are other countries that manufacture goods, they would be willing to trade for them for their various commodities they don't have or produce poorly. So countries who specializing in commodity production could get their manufactured goods through trade rather than having to make the goods themselves. Because the manufacturing country is specialized in manufacturing, and the commodity country is specialized in commodity production, it could immediately get more manufactured goods by trading for them rather than making them themselves. Or they could get the same amount of manufactured goods more cheaply with less labor, which is, pretty similar to the same thing. So the Stope-Per-Samuelson theory states that a movement to free trade will cause the real return of a country's relative abundant factor to rise, while the real return of the country's relatively scarce factor will fall. When a country moves to free trade, the price of its exported goods will rise, while the price of its imported goods will fall, which is essentially just a more theoretical explanation of what we've already been talking about. Okay, so again, the terms of trade will change relative prices and lead economic activity to commodity production and render manufacturing uncompetitive. If there is no manufacturing sector, then there can be no growth in manufacturing, so future activity in the sector is prevented. Manufacturing is a key component in economic growth. It was the Industrial Revolution that enabled sustained productivity growth. Agricultural and mining are low-value-added activities that can't really increase income levels that much. There are just fundamental limits to the fertility of the land and the resource endowments of countries. There's also limited utility of raw materials and food, so raw materials are pretty much useless unless they're manufactured into something. And while you need food to eat, if you produce more food than you can eat, then it's pretty much useless too. Services can really only grow as an adjunct or product of manufacturing, because people really want consumer goods before they want services. If they can't have goods, then they're not going to buy services because they want the goods first. Service industries are typically highly skill-intensive and do not have the capacity to absorb, as manufacturing, the type of labor that low and middle-income economies have in abundance. The bulk of services suffer from two shortcomings. Either they are technologically not very dynamic, and/or their ability to expand rapidly is constrained by incomes, and hence productivity in the rest of the economy. So there's a paper by Denny Radrick on deindustrialization, and it basically discusses the decline in manufacturing in emerging economies. And recently, phenomena referred to as deindustrialization by Roderick has been occurring in many emerging economies. He especially looks at Latin America. The theory is deindustrialization happens because of increasing productivity in the manufacturing sector, which means you can make the same amount with less people, lowering relative prices. And that seems to be the explanation for what's occurring in developed countries. But in emerging economies, the case seems to be different. If it were the case, then it would lead to you to think developing countries shouldn't begin to deindustrialize until they reach similar levels of incomes as developed countries. But that hasn't been happening. There's been a relative decline in manufacturing in many emerging economies, despite their much lower levels of income. Roderick examines this in his paper and finds that in countries that have some degree of manufacturing like Latin America, but a comparative advantage in commodity production, deindustrialization is occurring because of competition from middle-income countries with a comparative advantage in manufacturing, particularly China. So, the basic conclusion is manufacturing is a core route to growth for low-income countries. Countries with a comparative advantage in commodities will naturally not develop manufacturing without external intervention. So if manufacturing is prevented from developing because of comparative advantage in terms of trade, then countries are essentially prevented from growing over the long term. And that's bad because we want low-income countries to grow. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, then don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, go to my main channel page for more videos, and thanks for watching.